It's a well-known fact that siblings, even if they share the same blood, don't always get along. This was certainly the case between Napoleon Bonaparte and his brother Louis. In 1810, Napoleon, the ruler of France, decided to invade the Netherlands, which was at the time ruled by his brother Louis Bonaparte. But this decision raised an important question. Why would Napoleon, who had made his brothers co-monarchs of various client states because he trusted them, feel the need to invade and overthrow Louis? After all, the two were family. To understand the reasons behind this dramatic invasion, we need to look at the background of both the Netherlands and the Napoleonic Empire. The Dutch Republic, once a prosperous state, had been going through a tumultuous period due to internal strife and civil wars. The onset of the French Revolution in 1789 had already sent shock waves through Europe, and the Dutch Republic, weakened by years of unrest, found itself embroiled in conflicts. As the revolutionaries gained strength, the Netherlands became involved in a coalition against revolutionary France. The result? A series of defeats, leaving the Dutch Republic vulnerable and weakened. The country's political structure was unstable, and by the time France conquered the Netherlands, the old semi-monarchical system had collapsed. The last stadtholder, the executive authority, William V, fled the country, and the Dutch proclaimed a new republic. However, the new republic was fraught with division and inefficiency. Its leaders were unable to agree on much, which led to further instability. Meanwhile, Napoleon was growing impatient. Napoleon Bonaparte, the Emperor of France, wasn't one to tolerate weakness among his allies or satellite states. He understood that a strong, stable neighbor was essential to France's security. A fractured Netherlands, prone to instability and potentially influenced by Britain, was not in France's best interests. Napoleon feared that a weak Netherlands would leave the door open for Britain to establish a foothold in continental Europe. As a result, he made a bold move. He demanded that the Dutch declare a monarchy with his own brother Louis Bonaparte at its head. If the Dutch refused, he would invade. Faced with the threat of invasion, the Dutch leaders had little choice but to comply. Louis Bonaparte was declared King of Holland in 1806. Napoleon saw this as a necessary step to ensure the loyalty of the Netherlands, and Louis, despite being Napoleon's brother, sought to make his mark in his new kingdom. Upon becoming king, Louis Bonaparte embarked on a series of reforms aimed at strengthening the kingdom. He introduced wide-ranging changes that affected nearly every aspect of Dutch society. Louis's reforms were popular with the Dutch population. He built hospitals, reformed the education system, and granted rights to religious minorities. Moreover, he took significant steps to reduce corruption and establish a more centralized government. As a result, Louis Bonaparte quickly gained popularity among the Dutch people. He was able to build a reputation as a ruler who cared for his people and their well-being. However, things began to unravel between the brothers as the Napoleonic Wars raged on. Despite the reforms, Louis Bonaparte was still under pressure from his brother Napoleon, who increasingly saw his demands on his brother as necessary for the success of his empire. Napoleon was relentless in pushing his client states and monarchs to contribute more to France's war efforts. By 1809, after the successful conquest of the Netherlands, Louis was still facing the challenge of balancing his kingdom's interests with his brother's expectations. In the early days of his reign, Louis had been somewhat lenient in allowing trade with Britain, turning a blind eye to smuggling. Napoleon, on the other hand, had designed a grand strategy to weaken Britain through economic blockades, and he viewed any trade with Britain as an act of defiance. This tension between the brothers grew. Napoleon demanded that Louis implement conscription to support France's military campaigns, which was something Louis was reluctant to do. Moreover, he reduced the size of the Dutch army, using the funds for other projects like public works, which further aggravated Napoleon. By the time of the War of the Fifth Coalition in 1809, Louis Bonaparte's kingdom was no longer in a position to support France militarily, as Napoleon had hoped. The Dutch were unable to contribute effectively to the war effort, and to make matters worse, Britain seized the opportunity to invade the Netherlands. Louis, realizing that the situation was dire, called on his brother Napoleon for help. Napoleon responded by sending French troops to expel the British forces. Although this move temporarily relieved the Dutch, it came with a price. Napoleon was furious that his brother had failed to secure his northern flank. As punishment, Napoleon demanded that Louis abdicate the throne of Holland. To sweeten the deal, Napoleon even offered Louis the Spanish throne. But Louis, standing firm, refused the offer. This was the breaking point. In 1810, Napoleon decided to make a decisive move. He invaded the southern parts of Holland and annexed them directly into the French Empire. Louis, in an attempt to save his kingdom, hoped that the annexation would be limited. But Napoleon was relentless. He sent troops to occupy key areas along the Dutch coast, including Amsterdam. At this point, Louis knew the end was near. In 1810, Louis Bonaparte made a heart-wrenching decision. He abdicated the throne in favor of his young son. However, this was not enough to preserve his kingdom. Napoleon refused to recognize his son as king, and the entire kingdom of Holland was annexed into France. The Netherlands, once a proud kingdom under the Bonaparte, was now a part of Napoleon's empire. After the annexation, Napoleon made several attempts to reconcile with his brother Louis. He offered Louis the throne of Bavaria in an effort to bring him back into the fold, but Louis refused, instead focusing his efforts on trying to negotiate with Napoleon for the return of Holland. Unfortunately for him, Napoleon's defeat and exile made such hopes futile. Following Napoleon's downfall in 1814, some Dutch leaders began to call for Louis to return to the throne. However, the great powers, who were keen on stabilizing Europe, rejected the idea. The prospect of a Bonaparte dynasty next to a Bourbon France was seen as a dangerous combination. In the end, Louis Bonaparte never returned to the Netherlands. In hindsight, Louis's reign in Holland was marked by both triumph and tragedy. His reforms improved the lives of many Dutch citizens, but his failure to adhere to Napoleon's military demands and his eventual abdication made his reign one of bittersweet memories. For his part, Napoleon's decision to invade his brother's kingdom proved to be a monumental mistake. The fall of the Kingdom of Holland was one of many miscalculations that led to Napoleon's eventual downfall. As for Louis, after the fall of Napoleon, he spent the rest of the Napoleonic Wars urging his brother to make peace and restore his former kingdom. However, his pleas went unheard. Even after Napoleon's defeat and exile, the notion of a Bonaparte ruling the Netherlands was rejected by the European powers, who feared the consequences of such a union. Louis Bonaparte, the once popular King of Holland, spent the remainder of his life far from the throne, watching as the world changed around him. His story is a reminder of the fragile relationship between family and power. Though he sought to be a fair and just ruler, his ambitions and the demands of his brother ultimately led to his downfall. This complex tale of ambition, family, and politics is one of the many untold stories of the Napoleonic era. It reveals not only the ambitions of a man who sought to leave his mark on history, but also the price of loyalty and the cost of defying an emperor. A special thanks to my patrons. This episode wouldn't have been possible without the support of my patrons: James Bizernay, Sky Chappelle, Kart Tosca, Udan Wong, Juan Hockey, Anthony Beckett's, Blue Cardinal, Alex Schwinn, A Firefly, Spencer Lightfoot, Captain Sea Dog, Mick Ware, The Flying Deutschland, Gustav Swan, Robert C. Perkins, Schwinin, Michael Halbert, Castle Bravo, Marvin Cassau, Winston Quood, Rod D. Martin, Spinning Three Plates, Andy McGee, Kamoon Yun, Danny Atanasio, Mirza Ahmed, Coppertone, Maggie Paskowski, H. from Starhar, Arthur Hosey Jr., Kitro, Remco, Hoistman, Jim Sternberg, Bet Cabot, Charles I, and Lord Beak.